September 10, 1943, near Palermo, Sicily. In the sweltering heat of Sicily, Maria Rossi clutched her uniform, her heart pounding as Allied ships darkened the horizon. She had been taught that Americans were ruthless invaders, ready to crush Italian women under their boots for daring to support the fatherland. But as the first GIs approached, something unexpected stirred in the air. Not shouts of rage, but quiet orders in a foreign tongue. What they found in the camps across the ocean would unravel everything she believed. The bombardment shook the ground like thunder from the gods. Maria, a young auxiliary nurse in Mussolini's militia, had joined the service 2 years earlier, full of pride for the fascist cause. At 22, she believed the stories drilled into her at rallies and in the papers. Italy's ancient glory reborn under Il Duce, strong against the decadent democracies. Her days were spent bandaging wounds in makeshift clinics along the southern coast, where the sea breeze carried whispers of coming storms. Auxiliaries like her were women who helped the military with nursing and signals, seen as the backbone of the homeland's defense. Now, as shells whistled overhead, that defense crumbled. The Allied landing on Sicily was no surprise to those paying attention, but for Maria it hit like a personal betrayal. Operation Husky, as the Americans and British called it, began on July 10th with over 160,000 troops pouring ashore. But by September, the island was nearly lost. Italian forces, stretched thin after years of war, surrendered in droves. More than 400,000 troops captured in the campaign. Maria's unit, a small group of medics and helpers attached to a coastal garrison, had held out in a hillside outpost near Palermo. They treated the injured from skirmishes, rationing bandages and morphine amid the olive groves. But on this morning, the ground trembled as American tanks rumbled closer, their engines a low growl that drowned out the cries of the wounded. Maria wiped sweat from her brow, her hands stained with blood from a soldier's leg wound. She had seen the propaganda posters, caricatures of fat, cigar-chomping Yankees as greedy monsters who would enslave. Methodical sweeps, rifles at the ready, but voices calm. About 30 women from her unit, including Maria, were rounded up with a few dozen men. The Americans separated them quickly, herding the women into a shaded area under the trees. No rough hands, no jeers. One soldier, a tall man from Texas with a faint drawl, offered water from his canteen. Maria hesitated, her pulse racing, but thirst won out. The water was cool, clean, nothing like the brackish supply back in the garrison. As the sun climbed higher, trucks arrived to load the prisoners. Maria climbed aboard with the others, her small bundle of belongings clutched tight. A photo of her family in Rome, a silver locket from her mother. The truck jolted along dusty roads toward Palermo's port, where ships waited to carry them away. She overheard snippets from the guards, talk of sending them to America, the heart of the enemy. Her mind reeled. What awaited there? The stories said camps of horror, where women were stripped of dignity. But this first taste of captivity felt strangely orderly, almost respectful. The GIs shared cigarettes with the men, even joked lightly. Maria turned away, staring at the passing landscape, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and fading pride. What they didn't know yet was how far from home this journey would take them, and how the simplest things would challenge the world they had built in their heads. The journey from Palermo's harbor stretched into an endless gray sea, the SS Contessa rocking under the weight of hundreds of prisoners like Maria and her group. They were packed into the lower decks, bunks stacked 3 high in dim light that filtered through portholes smeared with salt. The air hung heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and canned rations, but compared to the chaos of Sicily, It felt almost structured. Guards patrolled the corridors. American sailors in crisp uniforms who spoke little but enforced rules with nods rather than shouts. Maria shared a narrow space with Anna and 5 other auxiliaries, their voices low as they recounted the horrors they had been primed to expect. "They'll break us in those Yankee camps," one whispered, her eyes wide. "Strip us bare and make us beg." The propaganda steamed steadily, zigzagging in formation with escorts, their wakes a white trail against the waves. No panic, just the hum of engines and the occasional blare of alarms that sent everyone below but ended without incident. Maria watched from her bunk as sailors distributed meals, hard bread, cheese, and tin cups of watery coffee that tasted of something real, not the ersatz wartime brew she knew. The women talked in hushed tones about what lay ahead. Over 51,000 Italian prisoners would reach American shores that year, shipped from North Africa and the Mediterranean after the armistice on September 8th turned former enemies into captives. Italian women like them, auxiliaries who had nursed and signaled for Mussolini's forces, were kept separate from the men for safety, a small mercy amid the uncertainty. Maria imagined the camps as pits of despair, where fascist ideals would be mocked and crushed. "They hate us for allying with Hitler," Anna said one evening, her voice trembling. "What if they separate us forever?" But as the days dragged on, Maria noticed the guards' efficiency, the way they rationed food without waste, offering extras to the sick. One medic even checked on a woman with fever, his touch gentle as he took her pulse. It unsettled her, this glimpse of order from the so-called decadent foe. Propaganda had promised savagery, yet here they sailed under protection, fed better than many civilians back home. Storms battered the ship midway across, waves crashing like artillery, and Maria clung to her bunk, seasick and silent. In the quiet moments, doubts crept in. Why treat prisoners like cargo to be preserved, not destroyed? She thought of her brother fighting in Russia, lost to the cold, and wondered if the Americans' strength came not from cruelty, but from the factories churning out ships and supplies. The other women prayed rosaries, their beads clicking softly. But Maria stared at the bulkhead, her resolve fraying like old rope. By the time the horizon lightened with the promise of land, exhaustion had settled over them all. Landing in New York felt like stepping into a dream they had been warned against. After nearly 2 weeks at sea, the ship eased Brooklyn Army Terminal, where officials noted names and issued tags. No brutality, just paperwork under the watchful eyes of military police. The process felt mechanical, almost kind in its efficiency. They were fed simple breakfasts of oatmeal and coffee in a holding area, then marched to waiting trains under heavy guard. Propaganda had painted America as a chaotic jungle of gangsters and excess, but this place thrummed with purpose. Trains clattered on tracks stretching west, loaded with ammunition crates and fuel drums that seemed endless. By late 1943, the port handled over 51,000 Italian prisoners arriving from the Mediterranean, funneled into rail cars for journeys across the continent to camps in the southwest deserts. Maria boarded a Pullman car modified for security, iron bars on windows and sentries at each door. But the seats were padded and the ride smooth. As the train pulled out, chugging through industrial yards and past waving crowds, some cheering, others staring curiously, she felt a pang of disorientation. These people, the enemy, lived in a world of plenty, their faces fuller than the gaunt ones back home. The trip west took days, snaking through Pennsylvania hills and Ohio farmlands, then across the flat plains where golden fields rolled under a vast sky. Stops were brief, for water and more rations, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, apples crisp and red. Maria shared hers with Anna, who marveled at the freshness. "How do they grow so much?" she whispered. The guards rotated shifts, some offering newspapers with headlines about Allied advances in Italy, but Maria avoided them, clinging to her beliefs. Yet glimpses outside the windows sowed unease, the endless rails, the power lines humming with electricity, signs of an industrial giant that dwarfed Mussolini's promises. Women like her, part of the auxiliary services that supported the fascist war machine, had been told America was weak, rotten from within. But this journey revealed order, not decay. Trains on time, supplies abundant, civilians going about life without the blackouts and breadlines of Rome. Nights blurred in the rocking car, lulled by the click of wheels. Maria dreamed of her behind them, sealing their fate. Trucks bounced over gravel roads leading to the camp's entrance in the Arizona desert, where barbed wire stretched across the sun-baked earth like a harsh welcome. It was late October 1943, the air shimmering with heat that made the distant buttes waver. Maria and the other women filed out, squinting against the glare, their legs stiff from the train ride. Guards in khaki uniforms directed them through gates marked with signs in English and Italian, no rifles pointed in anger, just routine checks at a wooden guardhouse. The camp sprawled over 160 acres, a grid of low barracks and open yards ringed by watchtowers, built hastily after Pearl Harbor to hold the influx of captives. For Maria's group, about 30 auxiliaries, this was a temporary stop. Many Italian women POWs were routed to smaller annexes or nearby facilities for security, as the Geneva Convention required separate quarters to protect them from the men. No catcalls or leers, just orders barked calmly, and a quick pat-down search that felt more like a formality than an invasion. They were led to a processing shed, where clerks at desks took down details, names, ranks, ages. Maria answered in broken English, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Nurse Auxiliary, 2 years' service," she said, expecting mockery for her role in the fascist machine. But the sergeant nodded, handing her a metal tag and a bundle of clothes, a simple dress and undergarments, clean and new. Propaganda had warned of stripping prisoners bare, reducing them to shame, especially women who had aided the enemy. Yet here, they were issued items without demand, led to showers with hot water running freely, a luxury rarer than gold back in rationed Italy. Soap, real soap, scented with something floral, lathered in her hands as she washed away the voyage's grime. The other women whispered in awe, Anna's eyes wide as she scrubbed her hair. "This can't be right," she murmured. "They should hate us." After drying off, they were assigned to a women's barracks, a long wooden building with whitewashed walls and screened windows to keep out the flies. Bunk, wartime Rome. She didn't eat it yet. It felt like a trick, this abundance mocking her homeland's struggles. The camp offered more than bare necessities. A library corner in the mess hall held books in Italian and English, from novels to newspapers, while outdoor areas had volleyball nets and walking paths under guard supervision. Sports helped morale, with games organized between shifts, a way to keep idle hands busy without fostering escape plots. Maria watched as a group of men from another compound kicked a ball in the distance, laughter carrying on the wind. For her, the disorientation grew deeper. She had braced for hatred, for the boot of the Yankee to crush fascist spirit. But this place hummed with quiet efficiency. Hot meals arrived that evening, stew with potatoes and bread, portions heaped without counting. As she ate, the warmth spread through her, stirring a forbidden thought. Was this the enemy's strength, not savagery, but the ability to provide without breaking? Anna leaned close, her voice low. They treat us like guests, not dogs. Maria nodded, but inside, the myths she clung to began to crack, piece by piece. But the true surprises came in the quiet routines that followed. Mornings began with roll call, not whips as feared. Sunrise painted the desert pink as Maria rose from her bunk in the women's barracks, the routine settling over Camp Papago like a familiar shadow. At 6 a.m., a bugle sounded sharp and clear, calling the women to line up outside for count. 30 faces in neat rows. No beatings or barked insults, just a sergeant ticking off names on a clipboard. Breakfast followed in the mess hall, porridge with milk, fresh eggs for those who asked, and coffee that steamed hot in tin mugs. It was simple fare, but the portions filled the plate, a far cry from the watery gruel and thin soup of Italian garrisons. Maria ate slowly, watching the steam rise, her mind wrestling with the ease of it all. The camp's days unfolded predictably, designed to occupy without exhausting, under the watchful eye of the Geneva rules that kept brutality at bay. By 1943, American camps housed over 150,000 Axis prisoners, with routines that balanced security and effort indirectly without hard labor, as the Army sought cooperation over resentment. Maria pressed a shirt smooth, the fabric soft and white, a luxury her family in Rome hadn't seen in years. Back home, wartime rations for civilians hovered around 1,500 calories a day, bread, ersatz coffee, and occasional cheese, while here, the camp kitchen dished out 2,800 calories per person, including meat and vegetables from nearby farms. This plenty mocked the fascist tales of American greed. If they were so rich, why waste it on enemies? Encounters with guards added to the unease. A young corporal from California oversaw the laundry, nodding hello each morning with a buongiorno, picked up from other Italians. He never lingered or leered, just checked the output and moved on, his rifle slung casually. Once, when Maria dropped a basket, he helped pick it up without comment, his gloved hand brushing hers briefly. She flinched instinctively, propaganda's warnings of Yankee lust echoing in her head, stories of women seized and shamed by the invading hordes. But nothing came. He simply walked away. The other guards followed suit, professional in their distance, patrolling the fences or driving supply trucks that rumbled in weekly with crates of goods. Recreation time in the afternoons brought volleyball games in the yard, where laughter mixed with the chirp of crickets, and evenings meant quiet hours reading letters from home. Censors blacked out parts, but the words of loved ones pierced the wire better than any key. As weeks blurred into November, Maria found herself anticipating the bugle, the structure a strange comfort. She mended a guard's jacket one day, her needle tracing stitches that held the enemy together, and wondered at the irony. The abundance of fresh linens and steady soap, small symbols of a world without want, began to erode the scarcity drilled into her by years of blackouts and queues. Her fascist pride, once a shield, felt thinner now, cracked by the desert sun and the quiet dignity around her. Yet it was the food that began to crack her resolve. At mealtime, trays arrived heaped with unfamiliar plenty. Noon, including proteins and fresh produce from Arizona farms. For many undernourished Italians, this meant weight gain in the first months, bodies recovering from years of war's toll. Maria hesitated before biting into the bread, its likeness a shock. Propaganda had sneered at American decadence, but this felt like quiet power. She sat with Anna at a long table, forks clinking softly amid murmurs in Italian. The peaches were sweet, juice dripping down her chin, evoking summer orchards her family once tended near Rome. But guilt twisted with pleasure. How could the enemy provide such bounty while her homeland starved? K-rations, The field packs designed for soldiers on the march often included chocolate bars as dessert, a morale booster packed with energy. In 1944, Hershey alone produced over 100 million units monthly for the war effort, the bar's high melting point keeping them solid in desert heat. At Camp Papago, these weren't just for guards. Leftovers or parcels trickled to the prisoners, small squares of milk chocolate wrapped in foil, a taste of the factories churning endlessly back east. Maria unwrapped one from her Red Cross parcel that afternoon, the snap of foil loud in her ears. She broke off a piece, letting it melt on her tongue, rich, creamy, nothing like the bitter substitutes of wartime. Tears pricked her eyes unbidden. This tiny indulgence mocked the lines for ersatz sweets in Italy, where civilians scraped by on 1,500 calories if lucky. The guards joined the line sometimes, their trays similar, chatting about baseball scores or mail from home. One, a sergeant from Chicago, noticed Maria's hesitation with the coffee, a real brew, not the chicory blend she knew, and slid an extra spoonful of sugar her way. "Helps with the heat," he said simply, no smirk or demand. She nodded thanks, stirring it in, the sweetness amplifying the warmth. This casual sharing deepened the dissonance. Stories from rallies had painted Yankees as hoarders, starving Europe for profit. Yet here they fed captives better than many allies' own people, the industrial might of America, steel mills and canneries working overtime, pouring plenty even into enemy hands. Anna leaned over.
Worry. A guard outside knocked gently, then entered, a medic from the camp staff, carrying a kit and stethoscope, his uniform neat without the menace Maria had imagined. "May I?" he asked in halting Italian, gesturing to check her friend. She stepped aside, heart pounding, memories of propaganda flashing, Yankees as brutes who preyed on the vulnerable. But he worked methodically, taking temperature and pulse, then applying a cool compress without rush or demand. No invasion, just care. Quinine tablets prescribed, rest ordered. The Geneva Convention mandated medical treatment equal to that for U.S. personnel, and here it was delivered without prejudice, a policy rooted in discipline to foster cooperation among captives. Over the next days, interactions wove into the fabric of camp life. During laundry detail, the same medic stopped by the troughs, handing out aspirin for headaches from the dry air. His name was Private Ellis, from a farm in Iowa, and he chatted lightly about the weather or the stars visible at night over the buttes. "Ever seen a sky like this back home?" he asked Maria once, his tone curious, not condescending. She shook her head, surprised at the normalcy, the way baseball cards slipped from his pocket during breaks. Stories of games in Chicago, heroes swinging bats under stadium lights. These moments humanized him, peeling back the monster mask of fascist broadcasts that branded Americans as soulless capitalists. U.S. policy in POW camps emphasized professionalism, with guards trained to avoid mistreatment and encourage goodwill, as seen in the low incident rates, fewer than 1% of cases involving abuse across 600,000 Axis prisoners held stateside. For Italian POWs, this approach paid off. By 1944, over 45,000 had volunteered for Italian service units, pledging against Germany in non-combat roles like loading ships or farming, trading confinement for purpose. Maria's fear, once a sharp edge honed by tales of assault on captured women, dulled to wary curiosity. When Ellis shared a comic book translation during a slow afternoon, tales of American folklore, not war propaganda, she read it quietly, the drawings of everyday life challenging the decay she had censored but heavy with words from the war-torn beyond. Maria clutched a thin letter from her mother in Rome, the paper creased from travel, ink faded but urgent. Bombings had shattered windows, food queues stretched longer, and her brother remained missing since the armistice. "We hold on for Italy's honor," her mother wrote, the fascist resolve still echoing despite the Allied advance up the boot. Maria read by lamplight in the barracks, the words stirring an ache deep in her chest. Rome under fire. Civilians scraping for survival while she sat safe behind wire. Propaganda from before her capture flooded back. Rallies where Mussolini thundered against the Anglo-American plague. Posters showing Yankee soldiers as rapacious fiends looting homes, and worse, especially targeting women as symbols of national purity. Auxiliaries like Maria, over 6,000 young women in the Servizio Ausiliario Femminile by 1944, had been trained in nursing and signals for the Republican forces, drilled with tales that invaders would exact revenge on those who aided the Axis. She folded the letter away, but the fear it summoned lingered, a shadow in the quiet routines. News from other letters painted a grim picture. The armistice of September 8, 1943, had split Italy, with many former soldiers and auxiliaries captured or fleeing German reprisals. Over 600,000 Italians interned by their former allies. For women in uniform, the dread was sharper. Post-armistice chaos, where liberation often meant uncertainty. Whispers of atrocities in occupied zones fueling the propaganda's fire. Maria's hands trembled as she washed at the basin that evening, the water swirling down the drain like memories she couldn't rinse clean. She scrubbed harder than needed, skin red and raw, flinching at the echo of a guard's boot outside. The barracks fell silent, Anna's soft breathing the only sound. But Maria's mind replayed the drills back in Sicily. Prepare for the worst from the barbarians. They will break what we built. Yet here, in the American camp, the nights passed without intrusion, the wire a barrier more to fear than threat. Flashbacks came unbidden during laundry, the steam reminding her of hospital tents where she bandaged boys fed lies of easy victory. One afternoon, bile, a flinch at a medic's approach, a retreat to the shadows when guards laughed. It wasn't assault that haunted, but the weight of unspoken shadows, the propaganda's poison seeping into every glance. As snow dusted the buttes in a rare winter flurry, Maria shared her mother's words with Anna, their heads close over tea. "They suffer while we eat," she whispered, guilt sharpening the divide between myth and meal. The kindness around her felt like a betrayal now, stirring a storm within, pride warring with the evidence of eyes and hands. A small gift would soon force the hardest truth. Christmas Eve 1943 crept into Camp Papago under a blanket of stars, the desert night crisp and quiet, as morale officers organized a makeshift celebration for the prisoners. Strings of lights, battery-powered bulbs salvaged from supply crates, hung across the women's yard, casting a soft glow on faces that hadn't seen such cheer since before the war. The command had planned it as a boost to spirits, drawing from the Geneva Convention's nod to holidays as a way to ease the grind of captivity. Maria lined up with the others in the mess hall, where tables groaned under simple treats. Pine branches for wreaths, canned fruit punch warmed over stoves, and at each place, a wrapped bar from the Red Cross holiday parcel. No fanfare, just guards handing out the goods with a nod, their own portions similar. For Italian POWs, these events were rare lifelines to normalcy. By late 1943, camps like Papago hosted seasonal gatherings for over 10,000 captives, complete with carols in multiple languages, and even a visiting chaplain for Mass. The gesture aimed to build trust, encouraging the cooperation that would soon see thousands of Italians join service units against their former German allies. Maria took her bar, the foil crinkling under her fingers, labeled in English as Hershey's Tropical Chocolate, designed to withstand desert heat without melting. Back home, chocolate was a wartime ghost,
imported sparingly before rationing choked supplies. Families like hers traded rumors of black market bars that cost a month's pay. Here, the U.S. had flooded the effort with millions. Welled unbidden, hot tracks down her cheeks as the flavor deepened. It wasn't just the taste. It was the ease, the casual generosity in a place meant for hate. Her throat tightened with the flood. Pride in the fascist path that had led her here, now crumbling like the wrapper in her hand. This small bar, born in Pennsylvania factories humming day and night, carried the weight of defeat, not on battlefields, but in the quiet power of plenty. Italy's factories starved for coal, her people queuing for bread, while the enemy shared sweets without grudge. Maria wiped her face quickly, but the sob escaped, drawing Anna's arm around her shoulders. The others noticed, but said nothing, their own eyes glassy. For many auxiliaries, this was the first crack in the armor, the ideology's grand facade dissolving in a moment of unguarded humanity. The chocolate's richness lingered, a bitter undercurrent to the joy, forcing Maria to confront the lie. The real war was lost long before Sicily, in the mills and fields that fed this kindness. As the lights dimmed and the camp settled, Maria lay awake, the empty wrapper clutched in her fist, its sweetness a seed of something new. This breakdown opened doors to deeper reckonings. January 1944 brought colder winds to the Arizona desert, the women's barracks a haven of low voices after lights out, where doubts spilled like secrets from shared bunks. Maria lay on her mattress, the wool blanket scratchy but warm, listening as Anna and others traded stories of home and the lies that had sent them here. I believed them. The Yankees would chain us, make examples of fascist women, one auxiliary murmured, her voice cracking. Maria nodded in the dark, the chocolate's memory still fresh, stirring her own unrest. Letters from Italy had grown scarcer, but smuggled news fragments spoke of Rome's liberation in June, the Allies welcomed as saviors by many. Italy's full alliance shift in October 1943 had fractured loyalties. The co-belligerent government under Badoglio declared war on Germany, turning former POWs into potential allies. By mid-1944, this opened doors in camps like Papago, where morale officers gauged willing monthly an industrial might that outproduced Germany, Italy, and Japan together by ratios of 2-to-1 or more. This wasn't greed, he said, but preparation. Millions of workers, women included, turning peacetime tools to war without the shortages that plagued Europe. Maria's mind reeled as he spoke, the numbers landing like shells. Over 425,000 Italian POWs held in the U.S. by war's end. Many, like her auxiliaries, now offered paths to service units, non-combat roles aiding the Allies against the Germans who had occupied Italy. The propaganda's grand illusion shattered in that moment, the fascist promise of glory built on will, not wheels. The enemy, not weak decadence, but a giant awakened, its victory forged in steel and sweat long before the first shot. Tears burned her eyes, not from pain, but the raw truth. Defeat had rooted in the fields and forges, not the fields of battle. She slipped away to the yard, fingers fumbling at the lapel of her old uniform stowed in her locker, tearing free the faded fascist pin, a small eagle, symbol of a dream turned nightmare. It bent in her palm, discarded in the dust like a broken vow, the silence around her, heavy with the weight of revelation. Back in the barracks, confessions flowed freer, women admitting the myths that had armored their hearts, now pierced by reality's quiet force. The climax of her unraveling came not in shouts, but in the hush of acceptance. The ideology's collapse, a personal quake, leaving her adrift in a world remade.
As spring 1945 bloomed in the desert, change settled in. April brought wildflowers to the edges of Camp Papago, their colors a splash against the red earth as rumors of war's end swirled through the compounds. Maria volunteered for the camp library, sorting books and newspapers in the quiet annex, her hands steady now as she handed out Italian volumes to fellow auxiliaries. The work marked her shift from silent observer to quiet participant, aiding the routines that bridged captivity and freedom. By VE Day on May 8th, the camp buzzed with news of Germany's surrender, and for Italian POWs, repatriation loomed large.
Nursing experience welcomed in aid programs or families, blending into communities with less scrutiny than men. During a visitor day in June, as the camp winds down, Maria spotted a family at the fence, American parents with a young girl, waving to the women inside. The child held out a small package through the wire, a candy bar wrapped simply. Maria took it, her fingers brushing the girl's, and broke off a piece to share back, the act a mirror to her own turning point. No tears this time, just a smile. The sweetness now symbolized not shame, but a bridge from hatred to quiet thanks. From braced for brutality to this gratitude, her arc traced in small gestures, the desert's vastness shrinking to the warmth in her chest. As summer heat built toward final goodbyes, Maria wrote letters to her family, words of homecoming laced with the lessons etched deep. The war's end brought freedom, but the lessons stayed. Maria's story shows how a simple act like chocolate could dismantle years of hate, revealing humanity's quiet power over ideology. In the end, the real victory was in the mind, not the map. If these tales of transformation resonate with you, consider subscribing for more stories from the shadows of history. As the gates of Camp Papago swung open in August 1945, Maria boarded the train east, her duffel light with mended uniforms and a foil wrapper tucked as keepsake. The desert fading behind her like a dream unraveled. Freedom meant homeward sails across the Atlantic, but the chocolate's taste lingered, a symbol of shattered myths, where hatred yielded to humanity's quiet strength, proving the war's true defeat lay not in guns, but in the mind's quiet surrender. If stories like Maria's move you, please subscribe for more glimpses into history's hidden turns.